Good morning.
Good morning.
Please be seated. I think some of you know that Ben and I vacation often on Cape Cod. And if you don't know what Cape Cod looks like, it's like a crooked elbow. The island goes out this way, carves north, and then hooks around on itself at the very end, where Ben and I stay, or all the way out at the very end, in this very sheltered harbor that's protected. It's deep in some areas, and at low tide, there's something called flats, which you can see on the coast, on the west coast going north here. When the tide goes out, there's a 5 to 12 foot drop in height in certain places. And low tide, during low tide, you can walk for miles out on these flats with the right shoes because it's rocky. And you walk around beached boats, these beautiful boats that are just tilted on their side. Also at low tide, even further out, sandbars emerge, and you can walk even further out into the harbor. So that if you're closer to land and someone is out on one of these sandbars, half a mile out, maybe a mile out, you have the illusion of the person walking on water. So this is going to be very sacrilegious, what I'm going to say right now.
We got your back.
Did Peter fall off a sandbar today in our reading? Was he walking on a sandbar? That's a very literal, leaning Bible interpretation. Let's set this passage in context. Right before this passage, we have the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus had gone off to pray, and the crowd found him. Prayer interruptedness here. And Jesus takes, blesses, breaks, and gives the 5 loaves and 2 fish to those 5,000 people. That's the fourfold movement of our Eucharist. Take, bless, break, give. We do that every Sunday, every time we have Eucharist. Then Jesus dismisses the crowd, and our gospel begins. And Jesus makes the disciples get into the boat and go away from him because he wants to go continue to pray. This gospel, I think, can be hard for us to understand, given our understanding of how the world works. Matthew's initial audience was steeped in Hebrew Testament scriptures and God's miraculous works with water, the creation story, flood, parting of the Red Sea. Water in the Hebrew Testament equated to chaos and uncertainty. So this rich imagery in today's gospel, prayer ascending onto the sea, choppy waters, fright, ghosts, Jesus walking on the water, would have spoken to those initial hearers of this gospel. And as with any gospel passage that involves miraculous actions, there are many interpretations. We can call them arguments, really. So we have a phrase in this gospel, walking on the sea while the storm raged. That phrase is used 2 times in the span of 1.5 verses, and this is where one of the controversies exists. One is translated, walking on the sea. The other, in Greek, is translated walking at the sea. There is a difference on that, isn't there? Some would say. Anyway, this kind of word play, I love to be involved with, but that's not the point of the story. That's not what we should be focused on. It is a distraction. It's absolutely a distraction. The question that we should be asking is, what's the point of this passage? How is it relevant to us today? This gospel passage is a paradigm. It's a paradigm of God providing help and aid in difficult times. The early symbol of the church, one of the earliest actually, was of a ship in troubled waters. You may have seen a ship in kind of waves. It dates all the way back to the earliest church. And it's a symbol of Jesus overcoming storms. That faith helps us overcome troubled seas. We hear the disciples are terrified. They cry out in fear. Jesus tells them not to be afraid, for he is with them. And Peter does something interesting. And I think Peter represents most Christians in this story. I think all of us at times reside in a place somewhere between doubt and faith. And we vacillate between the two. You know, Peter starts out with all good intentions, a stout heart, and then he loses his way. And that's represented by his sinking. Jesus doesn't abandon him. Jesus reaches out his hand and catches him and says, "Why did you doubt?" The Greek word here that we translate as doubt is not skepticism, but has overtones of vacillation. Somewhere between doubt and faith. Why are you vacillating, Peter? So I have a fear of heights, even though I love to live like on the 32nd floor with big windows. I still have a fear of heights. Don't tell Ben. And, you know, this fear comes from a childhood fall from the top of a playground slide. I was pushed off by an impatient classmate. So knowing the source of that fear doesn't abate it. It's still there. So the church I served as an associate rector in Washington, D.C., had a sextant who was a very short man, short in stature. He was no taller than 5'0". The nave of the church had a flat ceiling that was 22 feet up, and they had a 12-foot ladder. So to change light bulbs, this gentleman would take our 12-foot ladder and place it on top of two long folding tables that he would then get on the table and then climb up the ladder, which was, swaying, and change the light bulb. I found him doing that one day and said, "What the heck are you doing?" I was glad it wasn't our workers' comp agent. So I struck a deal with him. As much as I hated it, I said, "You set up the ladder and you hold it for me steady, and I'll climb up and I'll change the light bulbs." I hated doing that. Absolutely hated it. But I would go up that ladder, and because it was not tall enough, you have to get almost to the very top of it, so there's nothing to really lean on. So your ankles are leaning on the very top step. So I would get to that top step, and I'd bend over, and I'd hold the top of the ladder, and then I'd reach up and put my hand flat on the ceiling, and then I'd change the light bulb, and then do the reverse, trying to get back down. I just hated that. And the whole time, honestly, I was praying, "Gracious God, be with me, help me. Don't make me fall." Nerves are a good thing to some extent. It helps focus on the task at hand. But praying helps too. This may seem like a simplistic example, but I think it's a good jumping off point. Any fear we have, whether it is heights, coming out, being alone, losing a job, ending a relationship, facing an illness, standing up to bullies, any fear or trouble, this gospel is telling us we are not alone. Facing that issue, dealing with it, addressing it, from the simplest times of anxiety to the most complicated and difficult of situations, God is always with us. God will always be with us, whether we climb that ladder or simply try to climb that ladder, which on occasion I simply tried and said, "Not this week. We're going to do it next week. I don't have the nerves for it this week. Back to our gospel. Peter often gets a bum rap. Yet Peter is a human saint, like all saints. And a saint is not someone who is perfect. Probably most saints we probably wouldn't like very much. But saints try things, daring things. They fail often, but they keep on trying. Peter may have had a vacillating faith at that moment. But he was the only one who got out of the boat. And that risk Peter took changes the story. That risk changed the message of the story. That risk is the basis for the message of this paradigm. We are not alone in whatever we are struggling with in life. God is always with us as we try new and daring things. God is with us when we stumble and fall, and God is with us when we get back up and try again. Peter is a prime example of what being a person of faith is. Someone continually moving between doubt and faith. I must be on fire today. Sorry, couldn't resist. In those places of doubt, or in between, which are thin places, I believe we can find God in those thin places, in those places of doubt. In those places of doubt where we are struggling, we can and we will find God, waiting to calm the chaos within and around us, and allows us to find our footing, our bearing, to have the strength to try again, or try something new. And right there, I think, is the good and relevant news for us from this gospel passage. Amen.